Welcome to Whiskey Ace. I'm your host, Mike Gill, and over the last 2 or 3 years, you've hopefully watched some of our unusual whiskey videos. We've, pretty much done a lot of stuff. On location, Week in Whiskey with Jillian, which we may bring back sometime in the future. Food pairings, all sorts of things, and not really in any kind of order. So I've had a lot of people ask me if I would just go back to the basics and actually start from the beginning, and also it's probably a better way than organizing nose and tastings and master classes and that sort of thing. It's much easier if you can just look on here. So you shouldn't miss an episode. When you're looking on Whiskey Ace, just look for Series 1. This is Episode 1. And I'm really just sort of calling it labels and getting to know exactly what a whiskey is. And the most important for our channel is single malt whiskey. So the first thing is, what is a single malt whiskey? And believe it or not, a lot of people get this wrong. So a single malt whiskey, first of all, must be 100% barley, yeast, and good spring water. That's it. Doesn't have to come from Scotland. A lot of people call all whiskey Scotch. No, single malt whiskey. It must come from one distillery, but not one single cask. And so where it gets very confusing is the fact if you take a Bowmore 12, for example, and you see the age statement 12, that means there will not be any younger malts in the Bowmore 12, but they could be older. And I'll try to explain in a minute why that happens, but every distillation is different, and hence the reason why the whiskey industry does not very often have a vintage year, okay? But I'll get to that in a second. So we have single malts. Let's have a look at one. Okay, so this is an Arran 10, and it says single malt Scotch whiskey. There we go. We know where we are. It's a single malt. It's from Scotland. It's 10 years old, so it must have malts of 10 or older in it. Okay? And it says whiskey KY. Often asked this. So why do you often see KEY? And that is the Gaelic for water of life, whiskey. Actually, when it was translated in Gaelic, in Irish, it came out KEY, Scotland, KY. Doesn't mean anywhere in the world can't do KY or KEY. So, if we look at the next one, we have Bushmills, single malt, 10, just the same as Arran, but with this time EY, the Irish Gaelic. Now, can you get single malt whiskey, whether it's KY or EY, from anywhere in the world? Yes, you can. Absolutely. There's one in Wales now, there's one in England, Tasmania, Japan, of course, and I've probably forgotten some, France. But you can get single malt whiskey from any country, but not with the word Scotch. Then it has to be Scotland. Okay, so give you an example of that one too. Is Glenbretton from right here in Nova Scotia. Single malt whiskey. They've used KY. They do pretty much exactly the same as a Scottish distillery would. They've chosen KY, 10 years. Okay? That's a single malt. Or at least a little bit of a single malt. But first, what else is there in the way of whiskey? And we're not talking about bourbons and things like that today. There is what used to be called a vatted malt, which is now just, show you one right here, which is blended malts. I hesitated there because I can't get my head around it. I used to like vatted malt, or actually Diageo, Cardew tried doing pure malt, which so many people get upset about. Well, I'm in marketing myself, so pure malt was fine. blended malts, I don't know. Anyway, just a little tiny guy here that I've got is what we like to call teabag, but actually it's Gaelic and it's Shevek. And this one would be a blended malt, and in this case I do know it's only 2 distilleries. So a blended malt means it's still single malts, but it's not from one single distillery. 2, 3, 4. This one is actually from 2. So that would be a blended malt. And then blends, which could be anything, named anything these days, I don't know. But a blend, famous grouse, very, very good one actually. A blend doesn't have to age for too long, and it doesn't have to be 100% barley. It can be grain. I'll be covering blends in a whole episode because, you know, some blends actually have a lot more barley than others, and you know, master blenders, and it's wonderful, and we don't want to knock blends at all. 90% of all whiskey sold is blends, and there's a fabulous art to it, and we will certainly get to that. I guess my way is I drive a Hyundai Sonata. It's absolutely fantastic, and you know, I often do a 5-hour drive, but if somebody said, do you want to take my Jag or my Rolls Royce? Well, I would. So single malts to me are the supreme. However, during the week maybe you want to blend. Okay, so moving along, watching these labels, because it can still be confusing, is the next one is single cask. Now that's where a lot of people thought a single malt was. A single cask is one cask from the distillery, and it's matured in that cask for however many years and then bottled. There's no other older malts in there to blend it to, you know, have it exactly the same as the bottle you had last week. This is a one-off, and it is cask. On this one, it actually says Old Putney single malt Scotch whiskey, aged 10 years, single cask selection, and it's a 10th anniversary. Right there. But you can see it's a single cask. Okay? And it will probably be cask strength, which means it's probably going to be 56, 57% alcohol. I'll explain that just in a second. Just want to finish off the label part of all the different ones is independent bottlers, which will also get their own episode because it's a lot of people, especially in Canada, don't understand them. They sell very well in England. I've got a little miniature here. And this is a Rosebank 1990, which is obviously a single cask, which we just talked about. And Rosebank you can't get. Well, pretty rare. It's Rosebank Lowland that the distillery went silent. And independent bottlers actually buy casks, and they buy in one cask, so they can pretty much always put a year on it. And it's a great way to get a hold of whiskies that you just can't find anymore, and they're just as good. I mean, when they buy them, they know what they're doing. So, independent bottlers I'll cover a lot later. So, what would be left on the label to look at? One would be non-chill filtered or chill filtered. And as I love to tell the story about after Prohibition, where Hollywood stars in particular, or people with lots of money, chose Scotch as their choice. Booze just wasn't that good around that time. So they imported the Scotch. But one of the things that Americans absolutely love to do, even I do with some things now, but in England it would be kind of frowned upon to put a lot of things in the fridge. Like your cigarettes, for example, but certainly Scotch, they put Scotch whiskey into the fridge. They probably put it into their freezer, knowing Americans, but they certainly liked it cold. And what happened is, if it's non-chill filtered, it has a lot of fatty acids and esters, and as it gets colder, they will form into lumps. So you can imagine some Hollywood star putting the scotch in the freezer and then pouring it and seeing all sorts of lumps in there. So today a lot of distilleries chill filter, and it's exactly what it means. Take it down to zero and filter out. Very much like in the beer business, where you can filter with, you know, fine filters, or you can really filter things out and go eventually to pasteurization. So taking a little bit out, and so you can put it in the fridge now. And lastly, you would also get the alcohol percent. And today, from cask strength, 57, 56, 58, somewhere in that neighborhood, it's actually going to come down to somewhere around 40 to 46. And yes, you know, that is dilution a little bit, but it certainly makes the whiskey very, very smooth. And that again was World War I, when England introduced rationing, and they actually asked the Scottish distilleries if they would start to dilute a little bit, and that's how that came into down to 40, 43. So it all depends on what you like and your moods. 57% might be wonderful sometimes, and a non-chill filtered, again, if you're looking for layers and layers of taste, or maybe you're looking more for smoothness. So it's entirely up to you. So I hope that has helped with our first lesson on whiskey. And as you're following this now, I will always tell you what we're going to do next week, because usually we're going to have a whiskey. I think that's kind of important than just listening to me. So next week we're going to do Glenlivet 12. I think I got... Oh, sorry about that. We have a Glenlivet 12. That's a half bottle, so it's not going to cost you too much. And what I'm going to do is we're going to do a nose and taste, but I'll give you a basic how is whiskey made. And then once you know how whiskey is made, we're going to look for 3 factors on the nose and the taste that you will get and should get on Glenlivet 12. Okay, so good talking to you, and see you next week. Bye for now.